The strange thing about attending your own funeral is realizing who never stopped loving you after you disappeared. The rain had been falling since dawn, turning the cemetery into a watercolor painting of gray skies and blurred memories. I stood beneath the shelter of an old oak tree, my fingers wrapped around a paper coffee cup that had long gone cold. 50 yards away, a small crowd gathered around a polished granite headstone engraved with a name I still wasn't used to seeing. Emma Brooks. Beloved daughter. Beloved friend. Gone too soon. 5 years. 5 years since the world had buried me. 5 years since I had watched my own life vanish behind a closed door. The wind lifted a strand of my blonde hair across my face as I stared at the people standing around my grave. Some had changed. Some looked older. Some looked exactly the same. But there was only one person I couldn't stop watching. Luca Moretti stood alone near the front of the gathering. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He never did when he came here. His black overcoat moved slightly in the breeze, and his hands remained buried in his pockets as though he were trying to keep himself together. Even from a distance, I could see the exhaustion etched into his face. The kind that no amount of sleep could fix. The kind that came from carrying regret for too long. I remembered the first time I saw him. I remembered thinking he looked like someone who had never heard the word no in his entire life. Powerful. Untouchable. Certain. The man standing before my grave now looked nothing like that person. His shoulders carried a weight that hadn't existed back then. A quiet sadness lingered in every movement. The minister spoke softly while rain tapped against umbrellas. I couldn't hear every word from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I'd heard this ceremony before. Every year on this date, they gathered here. Every year, they mourned a woman who wasn't dead. Every year, I promised myself I would walk away and never come back. And every year, I failed. My gaze drifted to the bouquet resting against the stone. White roses. Fresh. They always were. Luca never missed a week. Not one. Through snowstorms. Through hurricanes. Through 5 years of believing I was gone forever. He came. The realization hurt more than I liked to admit. Because there had been nights when I convinced myself he had forgotten me. Nights when I told myself moving on would be easier if he had. Then I would see another photograph from a private investigator. Another bouquet. Another quiet visit. Another reminder that the past refused to stay buried. The service ended slowly. People hugged. Some cried. Others left in silence. Within minutes, the crowd began to disappear until only Luca remained. Just as he always did. He stepped closer to the grave and lowered himself onto one knee. The rain darkened his coat. He didn't seem to notice. For a long moment, he simply stared at my name carved into the stone. Then he reached into his pocket and placed something beside the roses. A small brass key. My breath caught instantly. No. Not that key. My pulse hammered in my ears. Of all the things he could have brought, why that? The key glistened against the wet granite. The key to a house that never became our home. The key to a promise neither of us had been allowed to keep. 5 years ago, that key had been the last thing I saw before every door between us slammed shut. And as Luca rose to his feet and turned away from the grave, I knew something had changed. Because for the first time in 5 years, the past wasn't staying buried anymore. My legs refused to move long after Luca disappeared beyond the cemetery gates. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady, collecting on the granite bearing my name while the brass key remained exactly where he had left it. I stared at it for what felt like hours. 5 years ago, that key had represented a future. Now it felt like evidence. Proof that neither of us had truly escaped what happened. I waited until the cemetery was empty before walking toward the grave. Every step felt heavier than the last. The wet grass soaked through my shoes. The cold wind slipped beneath my coat. When I finally reached the headstone, I knelt beside it and touched the engraved letters with trembling fingers. Emma Brooks. Gone too soon. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. There I was, standing beside my own grave again, reading the same lie that had protected me for half a decade. My eyes dropped to the brass key. The metal looked older now. Worn. Scratched. Loved. Luca had carried it all these years. The realization settled painfully in my chest. Carefully, I picked it up. Memories returned instantly. A small white house outside Albany. A wraparound porch. Blue shutters. A maple tree in the backyard. Nothing extravagant. Nothing worthy of a man like Luca Moretti according to the world. But it had been the only place where he ever looked free. I remembered the afternoon we found it. The smell of fresh paint. The creak of old floorboards. The way sunlight poured through the kitchen windows. We had stood in the empty living room imagining a future neither of us knew was already slipping away. Back then, I believed love could solve anything. I believed enough patience could bridge any distance. I believed people could simply walk away from complicated lives and start over somewhere quiet. I was wrong. Some doors close because people choose to close them. Others close because someone else is holding the key. I slipped the brass key into my coat pocket and stood. The rain had started to ease. Clouds drifted slowly across the afternoon sky. For the first time all day, a thin beam of sunlight broke through the gray. My phone vibrated. The sound startled me. Very few people had this number. Fewer still ever used it. I pulled the device from my pocket and stared at the screen. One new message. No name attached. Just a number I did not recognize. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The message contained only 6 words. He knows the house still exists. I froze. Every sound around me seemed to disappear. The wind. The birds. The distant traffic. Gone. My pulse echoed loudly in my ears as I read the message again. He knows the house still exists. Nobody was supposed to know about the house. Nobody except me. And one other person. Slowly, I turned and looked toward the cemetery gates where Luca had disappeared less than 10 minutes earlier. The key suddenly felt heavier inside my pocket. Because if someone knew about the house, then someone knew the truth had survived. And if the truth had survived, then the door separating Luca and me might already be starting to open. I left the cemetery 30 minutes later with the message still burning inside my mind. The road stretched ahead beneath a sky slowly clearing from gray to pale silver, but my thoughts refused to settle. He knows the house still exists. The words repeated endlessly. I had spent 5 years believing every trace of that life had been buried. 5 years building new routines, new identities, new reasons to stay hidden. Yet 6 words had managed to crack everything open. By the time I reached my apartment, the coffee shop downstairs was closing for the evening. The familiar scent of roasted beans drifted through the air as I climbed the narrow staircase to the 2nd floor. My apartment was small. 1 bedroom. 1 bathroom. A space designed for temporary living that had somehow become permanent. The walls were lined with paintings I never finished. Half-complete landscapes. Unfinished portraits. Fragments of a woman who never quite allowed herself to imagine the future. I locked the door behind me and immediately reached into my pocket for the brass key. The metal felt cool against my palm. I carried it to the kitchen table and stared at it beneath the glow of a single overhead light. Memories came without invitation. The White House. The porch swing. The way Luca had smiled the day we received the keys. Not the public smile he gave cameras or business associates. A real smile. Rare enough to feel precious. I remembered standing in the empty kitchen while he held this very key between 2 fingers. One day, he had said, "Nobody will know where we are. Nobody will need anything from us." It had sounded impossible then. Maybe it always was. My phone vibrated again. I grabbed it immediately. Another message from the same unknown number. This time there was an address. Nothing else. Just an address in Albany. My breath caught. I recognized it instantly. The house. The very house attached to the key sitting on my table. My heart began to race. Whoever was sending these messages knew far too much. I opened my laptop and searched property records. The house had remained untouched for years. No sale. No transfer. No renovations. Exactly as I had left it. Exactly as Luca had left it. The realization made me uneasy. Houses do not survive untouched for 5 years without a reason. Someone had been protecting it. Someone had been watching it. I glanced toward the darkened window beside the table. My reflection stared back at me. Older now. Stronger in some ways. More tired in others. 5 years ago, I would have ignored the message. Fear would have won. Survival would have won. But something had changed at the cemetery. Seeing Luca standing alone in the rain beside my grave had changed something I thought was gone forever. Hope. Dangerous. Unwanted. Impossible hope. I closed the laptop and looked once more at the address glowing on my phone screen. Albany was less than 3 hours away. Close enough to reach before midnight. Close enough to discover who had sent the messages. Close enough to uncover truths I had spent years avoiding. My eyes drifted back to the brass key resting beneath the kitchen light. Then I made a decision I never thought I would make. For the first time in 5 years, I packed a suitcase. Because somewhere beyond that address waited answers. And deep down, I was beginning to fear that Luca might be searching for the same ones. The highway stretched endlessly beneath my headlights as midnight settled across upstate New York. Mile after mile slipped past in silence except for the hum of tires against pavement and the occasional weather report drifting through the radio. I turned it off after 10 minutes. My thoughts were loud enough. The brass key rested in the cup holder beside me. Every time I glanced at it, another memory surfaced. A laugh. A promise. A version of myself I barely recognized anymore. By the time I reached Albany, the streets were nearly empty. Small storefronts sat dark beneath old brick buildings. Streetlights painted pale circles across quiet sidewalks. Nothing had changed. At least not on the surface. The address from the message led me farther outside the city until familiar roads began appearing one after another. My chest tightened. I knew this route by heart. Even after 5 years. Some places never really leave you. At 12:43 in the morning, I turned onto a narrow country road lined with maple trees. The branches swayed gently in the darkness. A quarter mile later, I saw it. The house stood exactly where it always had. White siding. Blue shutters. The wraparound porch. Even the porch swing remained hanging near the front steps. For several seconds, I simply sat behind the wheel staring through the windshield. It looked untouched by time. As though the last 5 years had never happened. Slowly, I stepped out of the car. The night air carried the scent of wet grass and distant pine trees. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime rang softly. The sound sent a chill through me. Because I remembered buying that wind chime during a summer festival. Luca had teased me for spending $20 on something that made noise. Then he bought it anyway because he knew I loved it. I climbed the porch steps carefully. The wood creaked beneath my feet exactly as I remembered. My hand trembled as I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the brass key. This was impossible. Houses do not wait for people. Lives do not pause. Yet somehow this one had. I slid the key into the lock. It turned immediately. No resistance. No hesitation. The front door opened with a quiet click. Warm light flooded into the darkness. I froze. The lights were on. My breath caught. Someone was here. Every instinct told me to leave. To return to my car and drive away before I learned something I could not unlearn. Instead, I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Fresh coffee. Lemon furniture polish. Clean laundry. Not the scent of an abandoned house. The scent of a home. The living room looked exactly as we had planned it years ago. Books lined the shelves. A cream-colored sofa sat beneath the windows. A framed landscape painting hung above the fireplace. Someone had been living here. My heart pounded harder with every step. Then I noticed a photograph resting on the side table. I picked it up carefully. The frame contained a picture of the house taken during autumn. Bright orange leaves covered the yard. The date in the corner was only 3 months old. Beneath the photograph sat a handwritten note. 4 simple words. He never stopped coming. My pulse stumbled. Slowly, I lowered the frame. Because there was only one person the note could possibly mean. And at that exact moment, I heard a floorboard creak somewhere upstairs. The floorboard creaked again. Not loud. Just enough to remind me I was not alone. Every muscle in my body tightened as I looked toward the staircase. The house suddenly felt smaller than it had a moment ago. Warmer. More alive. Someone was here. Someone who knew I would come. I placed the photograph back onto the table with careful hands and listened. Silence returned. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed softly. Ordinary sounds. Comforting sounds. Yet my pulse continued racing. Slowly, I moved toward the staircase. The polished wooden railing felt familiar beneath my fingertips. 5 years disappeared with every step. I could still picture Lucas standing at the bottom of these stairs carrying paint samples while arguing about wall colors. I could still hear his voice filling the empty rooms. The memories came so easily it frightened me. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped. A light glowed beneath the door of the upstairs office. My breath caught. That room had always been Lucas' favorite. The one room he insisted on designing himself. I took another step. Then another. The closer I got, the louder my heartbeat became. Finally, I reached the door. It stood slightly open. A narrow strip of warm light spilled into the hallway. I pushed it gently. The room beyond looked untouched by time. Bookshelves lined the walls. Framed photographs sat on a desk near the window. A leather chair faced the fireplace. Everything appeared carefully maintained, as though someone had preserved the room exactly as it was meant to be. Then I noticed the woman sitting beside the desk. She looked up calmly. Gray hair framed a kind face I recognized instantly. My knees nearly gave out. "Margaret?" I whispered. She smiled softly. "Hello, Emma." For several seconds, neither of us moved. Margaret had worked for the Moretti family for longer than anyone could remember. She had been a housekeeper. A caretaker. A quiet witness to countless family stories. Seeing her here felt impossible. "You were supposed to be in Florida," I said. She laughed quietly. "And you were supposed to be dead." I stared at her. She had a point. The room suddenly felt surreal. Like a dream neither of us fully understood. Margaret gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit down, sweetheart." I obeyed before realizing I had made the decision. Exhaustion settled over me the moment I sat. The drive. The cemetery. The messages. Everything caught up at once. Margaret studied me carefully. "You look like your mother when you worry." The comment nearly broke me. Very few people remembered my mother anymore. Very few people remembered who I had been before everything changed. "Who sent the messages?" I asked. Margaret's smile faded. She folded her hands together. "I did." My stomach tightened. "Why?" She glanced toward the window where moonlight stretched across the yard outside. "Because time ran out." 4 words. Quiet. Simple. Terrifying. I stared at her without speaking. Margaret reached into a drawer beside the desk and removed a thick envelope. My name was written across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. The room tilted. My heart stopped. Because I knew that handwriting. Luca's. And judging by the worn edges of the envelope, the letter inside had been waiting for me for a very long time. My fingers refused to touch the envelope at first. I simply stared at it lying between us on the desk while 1,000 emotions collided inside my chest. 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years of questions. 5 years of convincing myself that whatever Luca had wanted to say no longer mattered. Yet one look at his handwriting shattered every lie I had carefully built. Margaret pushed the envelope slightly closer. He wrote that 3 months after you disappeared, she said quietly. I swallowed hard. The paper looked worn from being handled. Protected. Preserved. Waiting. My name stretched across the front in Luca's unmistakable handwriting. Emma. Just Emma. No last name. No explanation. As though there had only ever been one person in the world he needed to write to. Finally, I reached for it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The paper inside crackled softly. For a moment, I could not breathe. Then I unfolded the letter. The first line hit me harder than I expected. If you are reading this, then somehow life gave us another chance. My vision blurred instantly. I blinked several times and continued. I do not know where you are. I do not know if you are safe. I do not know if you hate me. Maybe you should. Maybe I deserve it. But there is something I need you to know. I never stopped looking. My chest tightened painfully. I kept reading. Every room in this house still belongs to the future we planned. Every book. Every picture. Every promise. People tell me I should move on. They tell me grief gets smaller with time. They are wrong. It only learns how to hide better. The room disappeared around me. There was only Luca's voice inside my head. Steady. Honest. Familiar. I continued reading through tears I had promised myself I would never cry again. If one day you come back here and I am gone, do not let this house become another grave. Open the windows. Let sunlight in. Laugh again. Live again. Because if I loved you correctly, then your happiness should matter more than my loss. A tear landed on the paper. I quickly wiped it away. Margaret remained silent across from me. She understood some moments belonged only to the people living them. Near the bottom of the page, the handwriting changed slightly. Less controlled. More personal. There is one thing I never told you. I bought this house the day I met you. Not the day we got engaged. Not the day we planned our future. The day we met. Something inside me stopped. I read the sentence again. Then again. That was impossible. The timeline made no sense. Luca and I had known each other for months before the house ever entered our conversations. Yet the words remained there in black ink. I bought this house the day I met you. Beneath it was one final line. Someday I will tell you why. My hands lowered slowly. The room felt strangely quiet. Margaret watched me carefully. He never got the chance to explain, she said. I looked up. What does that mean? Her expression softened with sadness. Then she opened another drawer and removed an old photograph. The moment I saw it, every breath left my body. Because the picture had been taken more than 15 years ago. And somehow, impossibly, Luca was standing in the background. The photograph trembled in my hands. It was old enough that the colors had begun to fade around the edges, but not so faded that I could mistake what I was seeing. A little girl stood beside a picnic table wearing a yellow summer dress. Her blonde hair was tied into 2 uneven braids. Her smile was missing one front tooth. The little girl was me. I knew it instantly. The memory arrived in fragments. Sunshine. Lemonade. A county fair somewhere outside Syracuse. My mother laughing behind the camera. I had not thought about that day in years. Yet there it was, frozen in time. And 20 feet behind me, partially hidden near a row of maple trees, stood a teenage boy. Dark hair. Serious eyes. Hands buried in his pockets. Luca. My breath caught. That is impossible, I whispered. Margaret nodded slowly as though she had expected the reaction. That photograph was taken 16 years ago. I stared at the image again. Luca looked no older than 17. I had been 12. 5 years separated us, but that was not what made my pulse race. It was the expression on his face. Even from a distance, he was looking directly at me. Not the camera. Not the crowd. Me. How did he get this? I asked. Margaret folded her hands together. Because he was there. The room suddenly felt too small. Too warm. Too full of questions. I lowered myself back into the chair and looked again. My mind searched desperately for any memory of seeing him that day. There was nothing. Just sunlight and laughter and pieces of a childhood that now felt impossibly distant. I do not understand. Margaret stood and walked toward the bookshelf. From the highest shelf she removed a small wooden box. The kind people use to store keepsakes they cannot bear to throw away. She carried it carefully back to the desk and placed it in front of me. Neither did I at first. My hands hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs. Ticket stubs. Postcards. Programs from school events. Newspaper clippings. Tiny pieces of a life. My life. I picked up the first photograph. Then another. Then another. My heart pounded harder with each one. Different years. Different cities. Different moments. A school art exhibition. A charity fundraiser. A college graduation ceremony. In every image, somewhere in the background, was Luca. Never beside me. Never close enough to draw attention. Just present. Watching. Protecting a distance I never knew existed. Tears blurred my vision. No, I whispered. No, this cannot be real. But it was. The evidence sat in my lap. Years of evidence. Years of quiet appearances. Years of moments I never noticed. Margaret's voice softened. The day Luca met you was not the day you met Luca. I looked up sharply. She nodded. He recognized you the first time you spoke to him. That is why he bought the house. That is why he never walked away. My chest tightened painfully. Every story I had told myself about our beginning suddenly felt incomplete. Every memory had shifted. Because what I believed was chance had apparently started many years earlier. Then I noticed something at the bottom of the box. A sealed envelope. Older than the one I had already read. Across the front, written in teenage handwriting, were 4 words that stole the air from my lungs. For Emma. When she is found. My hand shook as I lifted the second envelope from the wooden box. The paper felt fragile, older than everything else on the desk. The handwriting was unmistakably Luca's, but younger somehow. Less polished. More hopeful. For Emma. When she is found. I stared at those words for several seconds before carefully breaking the seal. The room had become completely silent. Even the grandfather clock downstairs seemed to have stopped ticking. Inside was a single folded letter. I unfolded it slowly. The date at the top stole my breath. 16 years ago. Luca had written this when he was 17. Long before we officially met. Long before I even knew his name. My eyes moved to the first line. If you are reading this, then something impossible happened. I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like him. Direct. Honest. Certain. I continued. You probably do not remember me. That is okay. You were not supposed to. We only spoke once. 3 minutes at a county fair. You dropped a stuffed bear and started crying because you thought it was lost. I found it and gave it back. You told me your name was Emma. Then you smiled at me like I was the most important person in the world. My breath caught. A memory flickered at the edge of my mind. Not clear. Not complete. Just a glimpse. A tall teenage boy handing me a faded blue stuffed bear near a lemonade stand. I had forgotten. Completely forgotten. Yet somehow Luca never had. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I blinked and kept reading. That day was supposed to be the worst day of my life. Everything around me felt broken. Then a little girl smiled at me and thanked me for finding her bear. You made me believe good things still existed. I looked away from the page. My chest hurt. Not from sadness. From the overwhelming realization that one small moment had mattered to someone far more than I ever knew. Margaret quietly handed me a tissue. I laughed softly through tears and returned to the letter. I told myself I would forget you. I never did. Every few years I would see you somewhere. A photograph. A newspaper article. A school event. I never approached you because life kept pulling us in different directions. But I always checked to make sure you were okay. I closed my eyes. Suddenly every photograph in the wooden box made sense. Every appearance. Every impossible coincidence. Luca had not been following me. He had been carrying a memory. A promise he never spoke aloud. Near the bottom of the page, the handwriting became uneven. If life is kind, maybe we will meet again someday. If life is cruel, then maybe we will not. Either way, I hope you grow up happy. I hope someone loves you the way you deserve. I hope you never know how many times you saved a stranger without realizing it. A tear slipped down my cheek. Then my eyes found the final sentence. The sentence written separately from everything else. The sentence that changed everything. If you are reading this, then it means I found you after all. My heart stopped. Slowly, I lowered the letter. Because those words could only mean one thing. Luca had known exactly who I was the very first moment we met as adults. And he had never told me. The letter slipped from my fingers onto the desk. I could not stop staring at the final sentence. Luca had known. From the very beginning, he had known exactly who I was. Every memory I carried from the day we officially met suddenly rearranged itself. The charity fundraiser in Manhattan. The crowded ballroom. The moment our eyes met across the room. I had always believed the connection between us appeared out of nowhere. Now I understood something far more complicated. For me, that night had been the beginning. For Luca, it had been the end of a search that started 16 years earlier. I pressed both hands against my face and tried to breathe. Margaret remained silent, allowing the truth to settle around me. Eventually I lowered my hands and looked at the photographs spread across the desk. Every image told the same story. A story I had never seen because I was standing inside it. Why did he never tell me? I asked quietly. Margaret sighed. Because he was afraid. I almost laughed. Luca Moretti and fear did not belong in the same sentence. Yet the sadness in her eyes told me she was serious. Afraid of what? She reached for one of the photographs and studied it carefully. Afraid that if he told you everything, you would believe your feelings were an obligation instead of a choice. The answer struck deeper than I expected. I looked away toward the window. Outside, moonlight covered the backyard in silver. The old maple tree stood exactly where it always had. The porch swing moved gently in the wind. 5 years vanished. Suddenly I was standing there again beside Luca while he talked about gardens and paint colors and futures that seemed impossible at the time. He wanted you to love the man you met, Margaret continued softly. Not the boy who never forgot you. My chest tightened. That sounded exactly like Luca. He never demanded affection. Never asked for promises. Even when life became difficult, he protected my freedom to choose. The realization made what happened afterward hurt even more. Because I had left without giving him a choice. I stood and walked toward the window. Reflections shifted across the glass. My older face stared back at me. A woman carrying 5 years of silence. 5 years of unfinished conversations. Why now? I whispered. Why bring me here now? Margaret did not answer immediately. Instead, she crossed the room and handed me a small newspaper clipping from the desk drawer. My stomach dropped the moment I saw the photograph attached to the article. Luca. The picture looked recent. Maybe a week old. He stood outside a courthouse wearing the same exhausted expression I had seen at the cemetery. Beneath the photograph was a headline. Moretti Foundation announces leadership transition. I read the first paragraph. Then the second. My pulse quickened. According to the article, Luca planned to step away from everything within 30 days. The businesses. The charities. The public life he had spent years building. Everything. He is leaving, Margaret said quietly. I looked up. Leaving where? Her expression broke my heart. That is exactly what I have been trying to find out. Then she pointed toward the article. Near the bottom, written in Luca's own words, was a sentence that made the room spin. Sometimes waiting becomes its own kind of goodbye. The article slipped from my fingers and landed softly on the desk. 30 days. Luca was planning to walk away in 30 days. I stared at the newspaper clipping while a strange emptiness settled inside my chest. 5 years ago, I had convinced myself that time would keep moving whether I was there or not. People adapted. Hearts healed. Lives changed direction. Yet every piece of evidence scattered across that room told a different story. Luca had continued living, but part of him had remained frozen in the exact moment he believed he lost me. Margaret returned the clipping to the desk and looked toward the window. He has been preparing for months, she said quietly. Selling properties. Transferring responsibilities. Finishing projects. I swallowed hard. Did he tell anyone where he was going? She shook her head. No. The answer felt heavier than it should have. I walked slowly through the office, studying the shelves and photographs again. Suddenly everything looked different. Not like the collection of a man building a future. Like the collection of someone organizing a farewell. My gaze stopped on a framed picture sitting near the fireplace. Luca stood beside a group of children outside one of his foundation schools. He was smiling. A real smile. The kind that reached his eyes. The date in the corner showed it had been taken only 2 months earlier. I picked up the frame. He looks happy here. Margaret's expression softened. That is because helping people was one of the last promises he kept after you were gone. I looked down at the photograph again. 5 years. 5 years of grief. 5 years of waiting. Yet somehow he had still managed to build something meaningful. The realization filled me with both pride and sadness. Because while I had spent those years hiding, Luca had spent them trying to leave the world better than he found it. My phone buzzed unexpectedly. The sound startled both of us. I pulled it from my pocket and froze. Another message from the unknown number. This one contained only a location pin. Nothing else. My stomach tightened immediately. I opened the map. The destination appeared less than 20 miles away. A lakeside chapel hidden deep in the countryside. What is it? Margaret asked. I turned the screen toward her. The color drained slightly from her face. Tomorrow, she whispered. That cannot be tomorrow. My pulse quickened. What? Margaret sat down slowly. For the first time since I arrived, she looked genuinely unsettled. That chapel belongs to the foundation. She paused. Luca goes there once every year. I stared at her. For what? She looked directly into my eyes. To read the letters he never mailed. The room seemed to tilt. Every heartbeat felt louder than the last. Letters? Margaret nodded. One every month for 5 years. I could not speak. 60 letters. 60 conversations he thought would never be answered. 60 pieces of a life I had never seen. My eyes drifted toward the dark window again. Somewhere beyond those trees, beyond the silence and the distance, Luca was preparing to disappear. And somewhere inside that chapel waited the truth about the years between us. Then Margaret reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. Her voice broke slightly when she spoke. Emma, if you are going to stop saying goodbye to each other, tomorrow may be your last chance. I did not sleep. The house settled into silence sometime after midnight, but my mind refused to follow. I sat beside the upstairs window watching darkness slowly surrender to dawn while Luca's letters remained spread across the desk. The sky shifted from black to deep blue and then to pale gold. Every hour that passed carried me closer to the chapel. Closer to answers. Closer to him. At 6:30 in the morning, I stood on the porch holding a travel mug of coffee that tasted stronger than usual. The air felt crisp and cool. Dew covered the grass. Somewhere in the distance, birds greeted the sunrise as though nothing extraordinary was happening. I envied them. Margaret joined me a few minutes later. Neither of us spoke immediately. Some mornings arrive carrying too much weight for conversation. Finally, she handed me a small leather journal. He left this here 3 years ago, she said softly. I looked down at the worn cover. My heartbeat quickened. For me? She nodded. I think he always hoped it would be. The journal opened easily in my hands. Most of the pages contained dates. Short observations. Fragments of thoughts. The kind people write when they have nobody left to tell. I flipped through carefully. January 12th. Snow covered the porch today. Emma always said winter made the world look honest. March 4th. The maple tree survived another storm. She would have worried about it. June 17th. I caught myself setting 2 coffee mugs on the counter again. The entries continued for years. Quiet. Ordinary. Heartbreaking. Not because they described grand emotions. Because they described everyday moments. The moments people only share with someone they expect to be there tomorrow. My vision blurred. I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest. By 8 o'clock, I was driving toward the chapel. The roads narrowed as the countryside unfolded around me. Rolling hills stretched beneath the morning sun. Farmhouses appeared occasionally between rows of trees. Everything looked peaceful. Yet my stomach remained tied in knots. 20 minutes later, the chapel came into view. It sat beside a small lake surrounded by pine trees. White walls. Gray roof. Stained glass windows catching the sunlight. Simple. Quiet. Beautiful. I parked 100 yards away and turned off the engine. For a moment, I could not move. Then I noticed another vehicle already sitting near the chapel entrance. A black SUV. My breath caught instantly. I knew that vehicle. Not because of its make or model. Because I had spent years watching it pull away in photographs sent by private investigators. Luca was here. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every instinct told me to stay inside the car. To hide. To wait. But another part of me was exhausted from waiting. Exhausted from running. Exhausted from saying goodbye to someone who was still alive. I stepped out of the car. The morning breeze carried the scent of lake water and pine needles. Ahead of me, the chapel door stood slightly open. Through the gap, I could see sunlight spilling across wooden pews. And somewhere inside, a man who had spent 5 years writing letters to a woman he believed would never read them. My hand rested on the chapel door for several seconds before I finally pushed it open. The hinges moved without a sound. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting soft colors across the wooden floor. The scent of old wood and candle wax filled the air. Everything felt peaceful. Sacred, almost. Then I saw him. Luca sat alone in the front pew facing the lake beyond the altar windows. His back was toward me. A stack of envelopes rested beside him. Dozens of them. My throat tightened instantly. Those were the letters. 5 years of conversations. 5 years of hope refusing to disappear. For a moment I simply stood there watching him. The sunlight caught strands of silver beginning to appear near his temples. He looked older than the man I remembered. Not weaker. Just tired in a way that came from carrying too much for too long. He held one letter in his hands. I could hear the faint rustle of paper as he unfolded it. Then he began reading aloud. His voice was calm. Steady. Familiar. The sound alone nearly shattered me. Today the maple tree bloomed again, he read quietly. You always said spring felt like proof that second chances exist. My eyes filled immediately. Luca paused and smiled sadly at the page. I still argue with you in my head sometimes. I hope that does not sound crazy. A small laugh escaped him. The kind of laugh people use when nobody is there to hear it. Except this time someone was. Me. I took a slow step forward. Then another. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain he would hear it. Yet he remained focused on the letter. Margaret says I should stop writing these, he continued. She says some people leave and never come back. I pretend to agree with her. Then I write another letter anyway. His voice softened. Because somewhere inside me, I still believe you are reading them. A tear slipped down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, but another followed. Then another. 5 years of silence collapsed beneath the weight of that single sentence. He still believed. Even now. Even after everything. The chapel seemed impossibly quiet. The distance between us felt both enormous and paper-thin. Luca folded the letter carefully and placed it on top of the stack. Then he looked out toward the lake. I am tired, Emma, he whispered. Not of loving you. Never that. My breath caught. Just tired of saying goodbye. The words broke something inside me. Every reason I had for staying hidden suddenly felt smaller than the pain sitting in his voice. Every excuse. Every fear. Every year lost. Without thinking, I took another step. The floorboard beneath my shoe creaked softly. Luca froze. Completely froze. The silence that followed felt endless. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound. My pulse stopped. For one suspended moment, neither of us moved. Sunlight poured through the stained glass between us. His eyes met mine. And the letter slipped from his hand. For a second, neither of us breathed. The world narrowed to the distance between two people who had spent 5 years living inside each other's absence. Luca remained frozen beside the front pew. The letter lay forgotten on the floor at his feet. His eyes searched my face as though reality itself had become unreliable. I understood. If I had been in his place, I would have doubted it too. The silence stretched. Long, fragile. Then he whispered my name. Emma. The sound nearly broke me. 5 years. And somehow he still said it exactly the same way. I took another step forward. Tears blurred my vision. Hi, Luca. His eyes closed briefly. Just for a moment. As though hearing my voice hurt and healed him at the same time. When he opened them again, emotion lived there openly. No walls. No distance. No carefully controlled mask. Just relief. Pure relief. You are alive, he said softly. I laughed through tears. Apparently. A small smile appeared on his face. The first genuine smile I had seen in years. Then it disappeared beneath something deeper. Something heavier. I looked for you. The words were simple. Honest. I nodded. I know. His gaze dropped toward the stack of letters. You read them? Some of them. He let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. That is embarrassing. No. I wiped my eyes. It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever done for me. The chapel fell quiet again. Sunlight moved slowly across the floor between us. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the morning sky. Everything felt impossibly still. Then Luca took one careful step closer. Not rushing. Not demanding. Giving me the same choice he had always given me. Why did you come back? He asked. The question carried no accusation. Only hope. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because I was tired too. His expression softened. I continued. Tired of hiding. Tired of missing you. Tired of pretending the story was over when it never felt finished. A tear escaped before I could stop it. Luca closed the distance between us. Slowly. Carefully. Then he reached for my hand. His fingers wrapped around mine with a familiarity that made 5 years disappear instantly. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. Some conversations had already been written in 60 unanswered letters. Finally, I looked up at him. How many doors did you have to walk through to find me? A quiet smile touched his face. The same smile from years ago. The same smile from the house we never got to share. Every single one. My throat tightened. Outside, sunlight spilled across the lake like liquid gold. Inside the chapel, the future waited patiently between us. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. For the first time in a very long time, neither of us was saying goodbye. And standing there with my hand in his, I finally understood something life had spent years trying to teach me. Love does not always open the right door when you want it to. Sometimes it simply waits on the other side until you are brave enough to come home.